tossers have thrown it out the door with their behaviour this week. They should be ashamed of themselves. They should absolutely look at themselves in the mirror and wonder what the have they been doing. They're hissing at us and calling us cheats in the Lord's long room, and they have the gall to say, talk to us about the spirit of cricket. Absolute bullshit.
There's a big appeal that's hit him on the pad. He's out. Lions gone. New South Wales are 9 down. Onto Sydney Road, and it's hit a car. Oh, I think it's hit a car. What a way to bring up your 50.
All you want is to leave it all behind. Now there is a simple remedy to stay fit for all eternity.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menners, and joining me, returning after a week off, Damien Watson. Good evening, Damien. How are you?
Good to be with you once again, Menners. I understand as we record now, there's a leaders' debate between the two candidates for the Prime Ministership in Australia, and I wonder if we'll get the same sort of debate between us tonight.
I wonder if we'll get the same kind of viewership. But I think cricket debates are way more important than anything those two could be talking about.
It goes down as time goes on when it comes to the politics, I reckon. People get sick
absolutely.
of it.
I'm feeling a bit dusty tonight, Damien, because I'll tell you what, I've been afflicted by something. IPL fever's got me. You know, the first couple of weeks I was pretty lukewarm. I've just been warming up, going through the sort of early stages. But now the clocks have changed here. So Australian time, the games start around midnight during the week. That's just early enough to tempt me into staying up. And then I do the old, I'll just watch the first 10 overs. I'll just watch the first innings. I'll just watch the first few overs of the next innings, and I'm not getting much sleep, and I'm watching a lot of IPL cricket.
Yeah, I know, and it's the circadian rhythm killer, isn't it, when you watch IPL? But that's the thing. I think it's kind of a shame in a way with the time zones, because I often wonder if it was more time zone friendly, whether the IPL would gain more traction in Australia. I don't know about you, where you stand on that, whether it would make a substantial difference or not.
Oh, I think it would, definitely. And I think you'll see now there'll be more games on early here because of the clocks changing. So there'll be a few more 8 p.m. games on the weekend. So I think there'll be a bit more local interest. And we'll talk about the IPL and how the Australians are doing. And I think that is the main driver of Australian interest, is when there's Australians doing well. Like last year when Jake Fraser-McGurk was teeing off, he was kind of must-watch viewing there for a while. But no Australians really lighting it up, except for maybe Mitch Marsh. But let's get into all the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcast. And I want to start off with some great news. As you know, on this show, we've been talking a lot about the plight of the Afghanistan women's cricketers and the plight of Afghanistan cricket altogether. Well, there's been some great announcements recently that Cricket Australia is going to join with the ICC to provide monetary assistance and coaching assistance to the Afghanistan women's cricketers. So they're now going to be able to pursue their careers as professional players again. That's about 25 contracted women's cricketers from 2020. Most of them are scattered around the world now. But finally, the ICC has taken action, and this is the first step to getting funding to them and getting the women's team playing competitive cricket again, despite the fact that, you know, they're not allowed to play at home in Afghanistan due to the Taliban. But, you know, great to see some movement there, Damien.
And great for the ICC to step in as well, as they should, I think, in this sort of situation, Menners. If they collect a fair bit of money, it should go to causes such as this. I noticed, too, a number of the players are resettling in Canberra, and Canberra's been a great sort of centre for a lot of these players that have been displaced, and they've held a lot of matches actually in Canberra. The Meteors have done a lot of great work in that space, probably underrated work in that space to try and get some competitive cricket to some of those players who can't play, obviously, under their banner in their homeland. So I think it's good, and hopefully we see more cricket and probably more tournaments such as that as well.
Well, quite frankly, I mean, it's a bare minimum from the ICC, because the way the financial model goes, the fact is money is divided up from ICC events and paid out to every member nation, including Afghanistan. And part of the basically mandate is that some of that is to be obviously funneled into women's cricket. You know, you're supposed to have obviously a women's program, but Afghanistan doesn't. So, you know, it's been spoken about for a while that money needs to be redirected from Afghanistan to the women's team rather than just going straight into Afghanistan, and they can do what they like with it.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. So great news there. All right. Staying with big news about the cricket world. So we talked about this, that the ICC, and they had a recent meeting in Harare in Zimbabwe, that they were looking to maybe change the World Test Championship structure. This had been driven particularly by England, and I think India as well were pushing it a little bit to try and change the way the points were allocated for the World Test Championship. Basically, at the moment, you get certain points for wins, but then it's weighted by how many games you're playing. And the big discrepancy is, you know, teams like England play a lot more than a team like South Africa. So South Africa are squeezed into the final due to a better percentage of wins rather than having played the same amount of games as England. But, you know, the ICC have decided not to make any changes to the structure for the next cycle. So that starts this summer, I think, or this European summer, where, you know, England and India will probably be the first test series of that World Test Championship cycle. And then they're sort of going to look more into changes post that. So we might see changes sort of from 2027 onwards, but for the next 2 years, no changes, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, although I see the point, Menners, in regards to an equilibrium in relation to how many tests each test nation plays, because it does present a bit of a issue, doesn't it, when it comes to fairness? If teams are playing less test matches, and also there's a quality of opposition to take into account as well, and how regular that is as to whether you take on some of the better teams or not. I don't know. There could be a way, surely, where they can create a situation where every test playing nation plays the same amount of test matches. It's a complex question because you've got to treat every nation on their merits, and at the end of the day, you have and this is why they're considering the 2-division format. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind seeing a situation where you have the same test matches per side throughout that cycle. The only thing is, though, I see why they're thinking about bringing in the 2-division format, because, you know, you measure teams on quality and their, I suppose, the base in which the opposition is rated at. But I think you've got to have also, if you look at the bigger picture, a format where the lower ranked nations get exposure to playing some of the better ranked nations. I think that's the only way they're going to get better. So it is a bit of a complex one. So I do feel for the governing body in regards to making the decision, but I can see why they were considering having an equilibrium of test matches, because it does dilute the product a little bit, and I think it does affect the fairness of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just one of cricket's great quandaries. I mean, the fact is, for example, Australia, you know, we have staple 5-test series now against England and India. That's in the calendar.
Opposition. Yeah.
But we're not going to play other nations in 5-test series. So there's always going to be an imbalance of tests played in the World Test Championship. But I'm glad, you know, England's whinging didn't result in them getting some kind of dispensation in the current 2-year cycle. So, you know, I think justice was done, so to speak. You know, I think South Africa deserved to be there. They have their challenges as a nation. They have, you know, very pressing financial issues, and the fact that they've been able to make the World Test Championship final, I think, is a great thing for the game. And I don't mind if there's a bit of an imbalance in games played, because what I think the World Test Championship ladder has done to cricket is every game kind of means something. You know, even when you get to this sort of, you know, a dead rubber in a series, it has actually added to those games meaning something. So I think that's been a really good benefit from it. But no changes at the moment. Let's see what happens for the next cycle. All right, looking closer to home, you know, some quite a bit of administrative stuff, administrative changes. So CEO Nick Hockley has signed off from Cricket Australia, and Todd Greenberg has come in. So for those that aren't aware of Todd Greenberg's history, he used to run the NRL, National Rugby League, and then he moved to the Australian Cricketers Association, and now he's in the prime job. And the first thing he did, which I thought was interesting, was he threw down the gauntlet to the SCG when he was talking about the development in Brisbane and the new ground there. He said that, well, the SCG is going to get left behind, so they better do something. And I guess, Damien, what that indicated to me is Greenberg is going to come with a little bit more of a commercial. He's going to bring a bit more commercial imperative to the organisation. I think he's going to be a little bit more aggressive. And this is no slight on what Nick Hockley's done, because different era coming through COVID. But I think now that we're through that and cricket's in a really good place now. I mean, you shouldn't forget, we had Sandpapergate, which blew the sport apart. Then that, went straight into COVID pretty much. And finally, we're back into smooth sailing. But, that indicated to me what he said about the SCG, that Greenberg is going to push for better commercial outcomes for the sport and be a bit more of a leader who gets on the front foot in the media.
I think that's a good thing for the sport in a way as well, Menas, to try and capitalise. You probably have more of an idea about this than me, but when he was in charge of the NRL, I know it's a little bit different now, the era in which we're in when it comes to rugby league, but was he seen to be a bit of a maligned figure at times? I think there were a lot of people that were sympathetic to him as well with the circumstances of his departure there, but was he a maligned figure in Sydney in terms of his role? I know it's a highly scrutinised role there.
Yeah. Damien, look, I'd love to be able to answer that question, but listeners,
you're not into rugby league, are you?
Will show that I'm not into NRL, and I don't know much about.
Did he have? It's a bit like Gillon McLachlan for a long time here.
Yeah.
Even if he didn't follow the AFL, there was always criticism. He had his fans, but he also had his critics, and sometimes I guess people would say he was a maligned figure. So I just wonder whether that was the situation in Sydney as well. But I think...
So what I know of him, he's well respected. He's a real cricket guy, loves cricket, played first grade cricket. He's I think good for the game. And I guess one thing about his experience at NRL is, he had to put out a lot of spot fires in NRL. I mean, there's, especially when he was in charge, there was controversies every day, players getting in trouble, front and back page stuff that he had to deal with. So, he comes armed with that kind of experience. And, I think of, the current head of the NRL, Peter V'landys, and what he's done for the NRL with his sort of, real sort of strident promotion and really being aggressive. And I can see Greenberg being more like that as head of cricket now. Different sport, but I can see him really pushing for commercial outcomes. And it's such a huge era for the game, because there's going to be changes in the Big Bash. There's going to be a TV rights deal coming soon, which I think it'll be the first TV rights deal where a streaming service comes in really hard and offers a lot of cash for content. So he's going to have his challenges, but I think he's up for it.
That's going to be an interesting one because, as we know, News Corp provide a lot of contra Menas in terms of coverage and actually bringing it in the paper. And look, that's a whole different topic in itself. But
they don't even own Fox Sports anymore. DAZN own them. So
yeah, that's true.
News Corp don't even own cricket rights anymore in that sense. So the whole landscape will be changing.
That's right. But I suppose what I was getting at was they still provide a lot of coverage in the paper, whereas when we saw the A-League depart from when, as you said, Foxtel was under News Corp's ruling, the A-League didn't receive any coverage in all of the other arms of the media as well. So now that it's under new ownership, it'll be interesting. When I say under new ownership, Foxtel in particular, it'll be interesting to see what happens and how DAZN approach it, because they come from a lens of, where boxing and various other sports, UFC, etc., sort of dominate as opposed to cricket. But when you think of Nick Hockley's legacy, I know legacy is a bit of an overused word in this day and age, Menas, but when you think of his legacy, I suppose, he, as you said, he wasn't as strident or as flamboyant as other CEOs are in Australian sport, but he was probably the right CEO for the time in regards to putting out spot fires. You mentioned coming off Sandpaper Gate, but also I think people forget during COVID, Cricket Australia wasn't necessarily in the greatest financial position because a lot of the money that they acquired from TV rights deals, it was a big deal that was signed off in 2018 when it changed over from 9 to the 7 of Fox consortium. But you got to remember too, a lot of the money went to shares, and shares dropped during COVID, remember, and that presented a few challenges. They didn't have as many assets as, say, the AFL did, where they had money in stadiums.
Huge financial challenges. I mean, COVID bubbles is very expensive. You couldn't sell tickets. So, there was huge financial challenges. And, I think the legacy of Hockley will be his steadiness, his tenacity as an administrator. And I think, he's left a really solid foundation for Greenberg to come in and maybe take it to the next level. And I guess the only broad criticism of his era would be that the current TV deal is a little bit soft in terms of finances. And Daniel Brettig wrote a really good piece, taking into inflation and all the things you need to do when doing a proper analysis, and basically calculated that, year on year in this TV deal, it's less than what it was before, despite the fact that they could put out a press release saying biggest deal ever. It's, and I think his figures were sort of between $20 and $40 million a year less in terms of sort of when you take into account inflation. So look, I think Hockley's left a great legacy, and, I hope to see him around a bit.
Yeah, I think so. And you're right. I think the situation was a bit different when they signed that TV deal, though, because they were actually offered more money by Paramount. But I think they saw what happened to the A-League with Paramount, and also News Corp at the time owned Foxtel, and they would provide that contra when it came to coverage. They provided the extra newspaper content. That does have a bit of an impact in regards to the habits of viewers out there. And I know it hasn't been the greatest thing having cricket exclusively behind the paywall, I must admit, but there is that contra coverage that was provided. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the streaming services coming in, whether it fragments the product a bit. So that's going to be crucial. I think, as you said, though, I think cricket, it's had a great last 12 months in Australia, maybe 12 to 18 months when it comes to gaining attention. They've got to capitalise upon it. That's the key.
And also, I think as well, we've had a very, a very strong leader in Pat Cummins on the field, and he's very, very much the face of Australian cricket now. But that's going to change in the next few years. He'll probably move out of the captaincy, and we'll see a younger captain come in, which is a time when you might need, someone like a Todd Greenberg to be a bit more vocal in the media about issues and take the sort of heat off the captain of the team. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next few years because, and it actually sort of segues nicely into the next topic now. There seems to be a real drive to inject some more money into the Big Bash. So there's been articles in the paper, and, I spoke to Lee Jamon at a recent press conference, and he was asked about the privatization of the BBL. And he said that, to really grow the game and ensure that the BBL stays at the top and the front of the leagues, that they need to perhaps look at privatization as one avenue to keep them at the top of the tree in terms of leagues and not get overtaken. So, yeah, I think that's really exciting, Damien, because, I think there will be a push from Greenberg and the States to see if they can get, that huge cash injection that England cricket got from the sale of the 100. But, it made me think, Damien, what would you like to see in the BBL if all this money came in? There's questions like, should there be more teams? Should there be a New Zealand team? Should they play more games? Should they have other overseas teams? Maybe you could have a team based in Asia somewhere. So I guess sort of, say we got the magic wand of cash. What would you like to see in the BBL?
I'd like to see an aggressive move to try and get the best players in the T20 format, Menners. I think if you want to try and challenge the IPL in regards to quality, get some of the marquee names in the competition and indeed throughout world cricket. I think that's the only way to grow the sport even further or grow the competition even further. And I think also invest in people who have pretty decent commercial backgrounds who have a love of cricket. I think it's important that you have a product knowledge, but I think it's good to try and get that corporate dollar in when it comes to advertisement matters, because that can extrapolate and grow, as you know. And that's something that maybe Cricket Victoria struggled with a little bit when they changed over and Cricket Victoria took more control over the Big Bash franchises. They lost a lot of that corporate dollar. So I think if you had that wad of cash, that's what you do. In regards to expansion, I suppose you could make a move for a New Zealand team. Whether it would be received hugely, I'm just not sure. They have their own competition over there. It can work, I suppose. We've seen in other sports having a New Zealand team shoehorned into an Australian competition does provide a bit of a following, but I don't know with cricket, because I don't know if cricket stands in the same pedestal as other sports over there.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But, so if I look at it, if there was a massive injection of cash, firstly, what would we have to give up? So in the SA T20, for all that investment from Indian clubs, the best South African players have to be available for the SA T20. So, we've got this summer no Test cricket in South Africa. In England, they basically just walled off August for the 100. So the 100 just dominates August. There's no England cricket at the time. So what would Australia have to do to get that investment? Because at the moment, it's pretty much in its kind of best spot. And this seems to be the formula that works best. Start at sort of the school holidays, finish it at the end of the school holidays, and you've got that kind of 5.5 weeks where you've got the Big Bash. So, that can't really move. So I don't think if you got investment, you could expand it or add more games, because we've seen that doesn't work. So it's kind of tight. But I wonder if, Mark Taylor said a long time ago that, if we want the Big Bash to succeed, we just cannot have Test cricket competing with it. Now, that's a very controversial opinion, but, could you, really put the Australian team on hold for our domestic competition, and therefore you get all our best players in there? Because I agree with you. That's what I want to see. I want to see our best players in there. I want to see the best players from around the world. And the key thing, Damien, I want some integrity in the competition. So if there's a player there for most of the season, I don't want him leaving and going playing in another competition for the finals. I want him playing in the Big Bash. So it's like an actual competition. So that's where I want to see, like I don't think we need an overseas team. I don't think a New Zealand team would do anything for the competition.
No.
I don't think I guess if we would have a team in Asia, that would open up a massive market, but the traveling would be a nightmare.
Pain, I reckon.
Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. So I want to see the Aussie players in. I want to see better players in. You need more money. And if Australia really wants to make it a cash cow, you have to think about, for example, is the Boxing Day test the last test? Is the SCG test moved to a different period? And, from basically you've got all of January just completely for the Big Bash. And you can say to investors, from January 1st to the end of the month, every Australian player is going to be available.
It's an interesting quandary, isn't it? Because we in Australia have more traditional test match events, shall we say, compared to a lot of other nations, don't we? I mean, England don't have a Boxing Day test or anything like that. They can be flexible and move things around, can't they? Same with most other cricketing nations. Whereas I think, the Boxing Day test and the New Year's test is such an integral part of the summer calendar when it comes to sport, and it has been for so long. Hasn't always been the case, though. I think people forget when they talk about tradition, the Boxing Day period, it used to be Victoria v New South Wales for a long time. Then in the first half of the 20th century that would occupy that spot. It wasn't an international test match. Same, I think, with the Sydney test match. I don't think it's always been a New Year's test, has it? And there's even been summers in the 90s where it wasn't a New Year's test. So I think you do maybe have that flexibility. I think the Boxing Day test, maybe I'm speaking parochially, Menners, but given the crowds that attend and what an occasion it is, it's between Christmas and New Year. And let's be honest, it gets the ratings as well. It's going to be hard to move that. But I don't know, do people in Sydney hold the New Year's test so close to their heart that it will be a bit of a damaging thing to remove it from where it is?
Look, I think change is always difficult, but look, it's an event here, and probably rivals the Boxing Day Test in the sort of atmosphere and the hold that grabs on the city. Maybe that's just my SCG cricket bias, but I will say, if Australia really wants to make a great big bash, maybe you need to rip the Band-Aid off. I mean, you don't see the Indian team playing test matches during the IPL. I mean, it's just, it's like we can't have our cake and eat it too. At some point, we've got to make some hard decisions about, like, for example, the headline I read was that, they want to make the Big Bash the second best league in the world. Well, if you want to do that, it's not going to be easy. So there's going to have to be a payoff somewhere.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's hard because really the peak time is school holiday time, isn't it? That's when you get the families going to the cricket and spending the night at the cricket. That's the only time. It's going to be a struggle. If you were to move it at any other time other than that mid-December to late January window, I just don't know if it would work because people have got places to be.
And the other thing is just we were just talking about what we'd like to see in the BBL. I would like to see BBL matches on Christmas Day. So make it happen, Cricket
like Australia. The NBL men is following their footsteps. I don't know. I don't really care either way, but it doesn't bother me having one day where we can just forget about everything and just spend time with the family. Man, we have sport every other bloody day of the year.
Rather watch some cricket, to be honest.
You just don't want to spend time with the family, man. That's what it is.
That's it. All right, let's take our first break on this episode of Cricket Unfiltered, and then we will be back with an IPL update and some lovely listener mail from Yorkshire. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. I'm with Damien Watson. And the IPL, as I said at the top of the show, has grabbed hold of me. I'm a bit bleary-eyed. And it's actually a gripping competition. In the last week, we've seen the ladder further tighten up with only 4 points separating the top team from the bottom team. So it's really not worth going through the actual places because I said it's such a log jam. By the time you're listening to this, it can be totally different. But some of the things to take note of this week, we saw an all-Australian sledging stoush. Travis Head was having a go with Glenn Maxwell. They were on opposition teams, and then Marcus Stoinis came in as well, and he was going ahead. It's quite fascinating to see the passion between Head and Maxwell. Maxwell, I think, had a ball change, and Head made a comment about it, and then they got stuck into each other. So it certainly mattered to them.
I do wonder if that's a byproduct of maybe their relationship. I'm not suggesting they're at loggerheads all the time, Manners, but when you think about it, Travis Head and how big he's become over the last 12 months, Glenn Maxwell has a reputation as a big hitter as well, both similar type of players. Whether there's just that underlying competitive tension there. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would say a big clash of egos. I mean, the thing is, there's nothing more satisfying than beating your mates. So I can imagine that played into it. So we saw that match, and Head got the chocolates in that game. They ended up chasing down the second highest score in IPL history, the Sunrisers versus the Kings. Head made a dazzling 50, and Abhishek Sharma made a big 100. Last night, big game. The Punjab Kings were in action again, and they defended the lowest total in IPL history. They were bowled out for 111. So Marcus Stoinis was dropped. Josh Inglis came in, but he didn't make many runs. Either did Glenn Maxwell. And it looked like Kolkata Knight Riders were going to win easily, but they had a massive batting collapse and ended up losing by 16 runs. Ricky Ponting said it was the best victory he's been involved in the IPL. I actually went to bed thinking, KK, I've got this. This will be a tough loss for the Kings, and woke up to a very surprising scorecard. Australians over there. So a little bit of an issue now, Damien. Jake Fraser McGurk, 5 innings, 46 runs, average 9.2 this IPL. Basically, he hasn't scored consistently since the IPL this time last year.
Yeah.
He had a great IPL, and since then he struggled. He came good for one innings in the Big Bash. All the T20 leagues and all the domestic cricket he's played, he's really struggled to get going. And, he's in a massive rut at the moment. And this is a guy, a year ago we were pushing to be in our T20 World Cup squad. It's just a huge drop. And, I just, wonder, if he's as good as everybody rated him at the beginning, or if that IPL was a bit of a fluke.
Oh, he was so consistent, though, throughout that period. I don't know if you put it as a fluke. Or, look, only he can answer this question, but I get the sense it's a case where he's low on confidence. When you're a younger person, Menners, you probably take things to heart when you go through, and you're inevitably going to go through rough spots. And sometimes that can be exacerbated a bit by your own criticism, self-criticism, thinking it affects your self-worth as a cricketer. And we've seen this we often associate it with fast bowlers, don't we? When they get the yips and they just suddenly lose track. We saw it with Matthew Nicholson many years ago, where he just had a run of outs after he did make the Australian team. And I think that's just the case from a batting perspective with Fraser McGurk. I think he had a lot of publicity and a lot of attention. I'm not suggesting he got carried away with himself, but maybe there was a case, it's inevitable when you're younger, that you start to take in the hype and the publicity, maybe lose focus a little bit and concentration a little bit on the 1%ers, and all of a sudden you have a couple of bad rots with the bat, and it accentuates and extrapolates. So maybe that's simply what it is. I think he's got time on his side, though, Menners. I think he can bounce back. He's clearly got ability. I think he just needs to mature.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's definitely got ability, but I think he's been found out against the high quality of bowling. I think they've worked him out. And I do think he's just a little bit one-dimensional. He doesn't have – he just doesn't seem to have a middle gear. He seems to be, all attack, or he can sort of go to run a ball, but he doesn't seem to have the ability that the great players have to, really pick the right ball to go after. And it's a really tough one, because I think he's going to find himself out of the Delhi Capitals team.
Could Constas go down the same path potentially if he's given opportunity after opportunity, and the same sort of thing happens where he has his selection of shots but then gets found out? Do you think the same thing could happen, and that could be a bit of a pattern with younger players?
I don't think so. And I think the difference with Constas as opposed to McGurk is Constas is a run machine at every level. He makes hundreds. Fraser McGurk hasn't been that. He's been this sort of dazzling slogger. And I think Constas has got a lot more to his game. And I'd like, as I've said many times, I'd like to see Constas in the white ball setup as soon as possible. So Fraser McGurk in trouble. Stoinis dropped. It's actually been a very quiet IPL for the Australians. Maxwell's been average, good in the field, average with the bat. Head played well in one innings, but hasn't really set the world on fire. And Adam Zampa, he's got a shoulder injury and he's coming home. His IPL is over. So again, hasn't featured in the IPL.
Do you think it's just a case of fatigue for some of the Australians at the moment? They've come off a big summer, a fair chunk of them, as opposed to maybe the English cricketers or some of the other cricketing nations where they're leading in to a summer and they've had a little bit of a break. I just wonder whether that has an effect, and it's going to be an ongoing issue or obstacle for Australian cricketers to overcome. And it has been for a while, hasn't it? But now that the season is longer, whether fatigue comes into it, because you're coming off the back, a lot of these Australian players have a pretty hectic summer.
Yeah, maybe. I do think every case is different, and perhaps fatigue is an issue, but some of these players haven't been playing a lot. But I also think it is, that real pressure of, those prized overseas spots in the final 11. You're competing so hard for one of those 4 spots in the 11 that, there's a lot of pressure to perform as an international player. And the Australians have been very patchy this year. Cummins' team, the Sunrisers, bounced back a little in the last week, but still near the bottom of the ladder. Hazelwood's been consistently good. Stark's been pretty good. I guess the other thing is just, I think, I wrote off MS Dhoni 2 weeks ago. Well, that was a big mistake. In a recent game against Lucknow Supergiant CSK, chased the target down in a thrilling chase. And Dhoni was a lazy 26 not out off just 11 deliveries, smashing CSK to victory with Shivnan Dubey. So, just when you think Dhoni's done, he's still got a little bit of gas in the tank.
Yeah, and that comes down to experience, man. He's got the mature head on his shoulders. So, look, he's going to have to retire at some point, though.
That's right. Okay, and just in other T20 leagues, in the Pakistan Super League, so that has started. That's the first time the PSL is running at the same time as the IPL. David Warner is captaining the Karachi Kings. Dean Jones used to coach that team. Warner's played 2 innings and scored 12 runs, so yet to get going. Okay, now we have some listener mail from our friend Mel in Yorkshire. Hi, Menners and Damien. Hope you are both okay. Just to follow on from the earlier podcast about centrally contracted players not playing for their county state sides. After 2 rounds of the county championship, Yorkshire have been informed by the ECB that Root and Brook will only be available for 1 county game before the start of the next test summer. Neither Root or Brook have played any cricket since the Champions Trophy, with England's last game taking place on 1st of March. Brook was recently unveiled as England's new white ball captain. Indeed, the day before Yorkshire started a game in Headingley versus Worcestershire. So where has he gone now? We are informed Root is still on holiday. Anyway, had a lovely day at Headingley, with Yorkshire breaking the record for the biggest victory in county championship history. Maybe Root and Brook are good enough for England, but not quite good enough for Yorkshire. And he's also asked us for a T-shirt, so they're coming. Yeah, so Yorkshire won by 504 runs, so huge victory. And it seems, Damien, that the problems we have here with the Sheffield Shield, you can mirror them exactly in county cricket. And these are just the demands now on those centrally contracted players that, as I've said it before, that players like Cummins and Root and Brook, they're just worth too much money and their value is too high for it to be wasted on Sheffield Shield or county cricket. This is not my opinion. This is just the way I believe it's viewed from the people up top, and therefore they play bare minimum. And that here, Root and Brook, are playing 1 game to get ready for the test summer. I'm sure Bairstow's going to play more because he wants to get back in the side. But interesting. And thank you, Mel, for that great email.
Good on you, Mel. I was just wondering, Menners, I'm not as au fait with the English calendar, but in terms of taking a holiday, isn't there another time of the year in which he could take it? I'm just trying to think in the off-season for England. I don't know. I just think unless there's a jam-packed schedule outside of the usual season, surely you can take a holiday at another time. I don't know.
I think it's the same. I think it's the same as Australian players. There's a lot of demands on their time. They tour all winter. They play in the IPL. They play in all these T20 leagues. So I think it's just the same type of thing. And we saw it here. Last summer that half the team took a break just before the series against India and missed out on an Aussie series. I mean, it's just a problem that's replicated all around the world.
But can't you take, from an Australian point of view, there's time, isn't there, in the middle of the year if there's not an Ashes summer or anything like that? I know they're playing the West Indies a little bit later on, but you can take a couple of weeks off there. Most people, and I know it's different with the physical demands of cricket, but most people have 4 weeks off a year, Menners, and that's all you get.
I know.
You look at AFL footballers as well. A lot of them get way too much time off, in my view.
Yeah, but Khawaja and those type of people would tell you, but we spend most of the year away from our family and on the road. Anyway, look, thank you, Mel, for the great email. Please,
sign up for.
I know. The email details are in the episode notes, so please, listeners, viewers, write in, send us your questions. It's winter, so we've got a lot of time to answer them. Just staying in England. Headingley. Sorry, I just wanted to tell Mel my Headingley story. So I've been to Headingley twice, and both times was the 1999 World Cup. The first one was New Zealand v Zimbabwe, and we get there, me and my friend Macca, and it was pouring with rain. And so we were young men. So what did? We just hit the local pub, and it rained all day, but we had a glorious time checking out the pubs in Leeds. But then later that World Cup, Australia played South Africa in the Super Sixes, which was basically an elimination game for Australia. They had to beat South Africa, which meant that they would play South Africa in that famous semi-final a few days later. And I caught the bus up to Headingley with South African cricket fans just giving it to me and my mate, how they were going to knock us out in Headingley. And then we saw the most epic game with Herschel Gibbs spilling Steve Waugh with an early celebration, and then Waugh blasting a century to see Australia into the semi-finals and eventually World Cup glory. And that night in Headingley, after that game of the Super Sixes, I celebrated with the Aussie team till very late.
Did you really?
Songs. I did indeed. Yep, indeed.
Were they just out in the pub? I don't know if that would happen now, but were they just out at a local pub and just?
No, so we went to a hotel bar near where we were staying, and that was the hotel they were staying at, the players.
Right.
And I knew a few of the players, like I knew Shane Lee, he was in the squad. Knew a couple of the other ones, but particularly Shane Lee. And so, anyway, Leeds, Headingley, great ground. Very jealous that Mel gets to go there and watch his county cricket. Just a famous game, famous game. So tense. That was Tom Moody came in at the end and just settled the nerves because it was all on the line, Damien. Like if Australia lost, their World Cup tour was over, and so was mine. That was it. So. Anyway,
they were 4 for 52, weren't they, at one
yes,
point?
Yep. And then Ponting and Waugh rescued us. All right, so just back. So in England, I mentioned Cameron Bancroft 163. I talked about that on my last episode. I guess the player for me to watch, Damien, and you'll like this, Fergus O'Neill, a star of the Victorian team. He's taken 11 wickets so far at 19.27, and to me, he could be that perfect English type bowler that we take on an Ashes tour. He could be that English specialist like a Terry Alderman or a Peter Siddle from 2019. So really curious how Fergus O'Neill does for Nottinghamshire. But, he really impressed me, commentated on a couple of games for him. And, he's got all the skills to be a terrific bowler and just probably needs to add a few yards of pace.
Yeah, and he's not too bad with the bat either. Like he can be a handy. I'm not saying he's going to make a century or anything, but he can be a handy lower order player who can knock a quick 30 or 40 as well. And he's got marketability about him, Menners too, which doesn't hurt necessarily either.
Why?
Why
is he so?
About him.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Oh, he has the interesting hairstyles, and
he's got the mullet.
The way he acts out of the field. Yeah, just the way he acts out of the field. He's a good spiritual. Not leader necessarily yet, but I think he can develop into a good spiritual leader for the team. He's one of those players that's good for the character of the team and the culture, camaraderie.
Absolutely. All right. So that is it for all the cricket news. I said it before, but Harry Brook has been announced as England's white ball skipper, or Mel kindly added that to the his email. But I think the interesting thing for me is Brook is only 26. So this is a big position for him. And you'd have to say he's definitely a future England Test skipper if he can do well as a white ball skipper. All right, let's wrap this up with Can't Let It Go, that little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to Alex Carey, who's just had a wonderful summer with bat and glove. Damien, what's your Can't Let It Go?
All right, just a couple of little things. Firstly, you mentioned county cricket. Well, Caleb Jewell has been playing well in county cricket. Third half century in as many innings recently. So watch for him, a player, of course, from Tasmania who's been pretty consistent, goes a little bit under the radar. So that's one for me. And also, Menners, Daniel Cherney of Code Sports gave us a bit of an insight as to the potential contract changes with the state cricketing squads. And he noted that Daniel Hughes is set for the Axe, the New South Wales veteran, and also it looks like Darcy Short may lose his WA contract as well, a player who was not that long ago, Menners, in Australia's white ball lineup.
Yeah, interesting. I reckon Short is in that boat of just being a bit of a T20 specialist now, and he might just need to go down that avenue of getting as many gigs as he can. And look, I'm not surprised Daniel Hughes' contract is not being renewed because he's been a magnificent servant to the game. But it's time for New South Wales to look to the future, I think, and build on the young players that they've got in that team.
36 years of age, of course. I'm a little bit more sympathetic to him in the sense that, look, he didn't have the best season the season just gone, but prior, when New South Wales were at their lowest ebb, he was the only one that really stood up for a long period of time. Particularly had that great run in the 50-over format too, Meadows, where he's just scoring century after century.
Yeah, no, that's true. Friend of the show as well. All right, my can't let it go is I couldn't miss this one because we beat the Poms again. So
great game, this one.
Exactly. The cricket season never ends. In Sydney over the last 4 days, Australia A and England A have been playing. Women's teams have been playing, and Australia A beat England A in the last over of the game on the final afternoon. A terrific game. England A were left to chase 290 runs in the final 2 sessions, and it wasn't until the last over that Australia got the last wicket. Charlie Knott with magnificent ending to the game with 123. So, yeah, just a really good victory for Australia A there, beating England A. And I wonder if that's it for the cricket season, Damien. Like, there can't be any more matches scheduled because, it's been a long summer. I was sort of thinking of going out to that game, and I was told, look, there's going to be no facilities for anyone that Cricket New South Wales.
Which is a shame. I think that's a bit of a shame. I don't know. It's a hard one, is it? Because it's hard to fit into the schedule. But it'd be great if it was at a different time, those sorts of tour matches. Menners, I know it's hard because I've got to fit it in between the WNCL, the WBBL. But hopefully now that we see the Australian women's team and their matches move to a lot later in the summer, you can have those tour matches interspersed because WBBL finishes start of December, and then what else? The occasional WNCL game here and there, but there's not much else. I reckon you could have a tour game like that potentially, and allow people to see it.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. I'd love to go. All right, that is it for this edition of Cricket Unfiltered. Damien, where can the listeners catch you? And I believe if you're an AFL fan, you'll be on commentary this weekend.
Yeah, we've got Sydney versus Port Adelaide, Benners. That'll be an interesting game.
Swans.
Your beloved Swans at the SCG. Yep. Good to see them getting. We'll see how they go with the crowds this season, but they're not as good a start to the season as the last couple with the Swans, but they're middle of the road at the moment. Had a lot of injuries. At Damo_Watts on Twitter, my handle.
Great, and thanks for the hot takes on the Sydney Swans. But you're on the SEN app commentating. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Great.
And if you're in Adelaide, it'll be on their station as well because Port Adelaide are playing.
Lovely. Well, you know where you can find me on social media, everyone. But don't forget, rate and review the show. I've had a couple of ratings in the last couple of weeks, so really appreciate them. Don't forget, if you haven't, subscribe to the show, follow the show. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're also on TikTok. If you want an ad-free version of the show, we are on Patreon. But have a great long weekend if you're in Australia. Enjoy the time off, and we'll be back next week with another episode.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everyone. Send us your emails.